Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It's Wednesday. We're in the book of Haggai, chapter 2, verses 10 through 23. We have another date. It says on December the 18th, so exactly almost 2 months to the day from the previous date, and a little bit time of the second year of King Darius's reign. The Lord sent this message to the prophet Haggai. This is what the Lord of Heaven's army says. Ask the priest this question about the law. If one of you is carrying some meat from a holy sacrifice in his robes, and his robes happens to brush up against some bread or stew, wine or olive oil, or any other kind of food, will it also become holy? The priest replied, no. Then Haggai asked, if someone becomes ceremonially unclean by touching a dead person, and then touches any of these foods, will the food be defiled? And the priest answered, yes. Then Haggai responded, that is how it is with this people and this nation, says the Lord. Everything they do and everything they offer is defiled by their sin. Look at what was happening to you before you began to lay the foundation of the Lord's temple. When you hoped for a 20-bushel crop, you harvested only 10. When you expected only to draw 50 gallons from the winepress, you found only 20. I sent blight and mildew and hail to destroy everything you worked so hard to produce. Even so, you refused to return to me. So he tells them, and this is true in the Old Testament, significantly true, more so than in the New Testament. But prosperity was tied to spiritual condition in the Old Testament. And that bothers some people, and I've talked about it in sermons recently, that one of the dangers was that the prosperity, the velocity of it, or the speed of it, or the trajectory of it would continue even after they had abandoned God for a short period of time, but then it would drop off. And the other thing is true, that sometimes turning back to God, it took a little while for the prosperity to catch up, but it always did. The question I want to talk about today is, how does sin affect our prosperity? What kind of effects does it have on our finances specifically? That's what I'm speaking of, because that's what he's talking about here. How does sin affect our finances?
Well, earlier, back in the first chapter, he used a terminology. He said it's like putting money in a bag. Some translations say purse, container, pockets
With holes in it.
Yeah. That you're doing things to gather in, to accumulate, but it's just running out in every direction, and to the point you're like, what happened to it? Where did it go? And so he makes it clear from the beginning that there is a direct correlation to it. That it does have a significant impact.
And I think you're speaking of priorities.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And what are some ways? Can you give some specific ways, or can it be specific ways, or can it just be in generalities?
Well, I think the answer is both. Let me give you one example that came to my mind this morning, rereading through this in Proverbs, where he talks about immorality in relationships. If you commit sin, he's talking about, and that relationship is messed up, is dissolved because of immorality. He gets pretty specific in there in the writing. He said, you lose your influence, you use your money, it goes to other people, it gets divided in ways and places that you didn't intend for it. So there's a direct example of how sin can impact finances. I mean, that's one I think everybody can relate to. And so there is a direct connect in how we live and how it impacts finances.
Yeah, and I think this kind of encompasses that. I feel like you constantly see people whose spiritual lives are in a mess, constantly trying to feel something that they believe money is going to solve for them. And so it's just constantly this new thing, this new house, this new vacation, that somehow this thing is going to be the thing that makes me happy. And the next thing costs more money, and the next thing costs more money. And then, to some degree, for a lot of those people, it doesn't matter how much you're making. It's never going to be enough, because you can't fill that void.
Yeah, and even the pursuit of filling the void, the peace of God, the things that we really want satisfaction, the pursuit of those things often overextend us to the point that it just creates this this avalanche that we can never deal with, because it creates more lack of peace and rest and harmony, and stresses relationships because of priorities are out of order. Anytime I have an extended, significant conversation with people, church folk, believers, about money problems or issues, very on in the conversation, the question has to be dealt with and asked, are you tithing? Are you giving? Are you generous to God? Because if you're disobeying the principle of generosity in your life, how can you expect the rest of it, to fall into place? There's this thing of spiritual order and discipline, and it does matter. It comes into play.
Now, I want to talk about the opposite side of this in just a minute, but I'll give some examples. Pretty much any sin, and especially the big sins, okay, adultery, fornication, addiction, they take our focus off of what's important. Okay, so let's just say, let's take God out of the equation. All right. If you're a person that's committing adultery and you are working a job, your mind is often distracted from being able to work to focus on that. So you're less productive. You're not going to get promotions. You're leaving as early as you can. You're not taking the overtime that you might used to have taken. Besides the extra cost that go into the hiding of it, whether it's a hotel room or a disposable phone or, right? There's a lot of pieces that go into it that take you away. The gas money for a rendezvous, there's a lot of pieces to it that I don't think we
think through.
Like if you take God out of the equation,
there's still a cost.
There's a cost to certain sins. Right. Addiction is the cost of drugs. Yes. It's the distraction from the job. It's the inability for you to focus on self-improvement. Just taking God out of the equation, there's a cost to some sin, and it just affects our prosperity. When our hearts are right with God, we have much more clarity to be able to do the things that we need or should be doing. And then you add in the giving piece. All right, so I'll give you a piece. I'll give you an example, and this is where the tension comes. All right, because some people will say, "Well, I don't commit adultery. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not spending my time over here doing all of these things." Prosperity, because there is some correlation. Prosperity gives us options that we didn't have. Mm-hmm. So we get a house at the beach or a boat or, a house in the mountains, or we have money to go on trips every weekend or whatever, or our kids become involved in sports. And let's be clear about something. Travel sports are about money.
Yes.
More than anything else.
I'm convinced of it.
I talk to coaches all the time.
Yeah.
And the coaches, it's parent coaches that are involved in it. They're like, the only people coming out good are the people who are organizing this stuff, and they're making the money. But so that becomes an option that you wouldn't have. Poor kids don't have that option. Okay, they don't have parents that can pay for them to go on the trip. So you've got a certain level of prosperity that takes you away from your spiritual community, the ability to worship, your ability to gather. And so what financial blessing you've been given begins to be used to take you away from the very thing that caused you to invest in the right things. And then you stop investing yourself spiritually, you stop giving, and the trajectory of prosperity continues for a little while, even though your spiritual condition has waned. But then it drops off, and you don't see how the two went together, because one came so much later than the other. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, sometimes our prosperity affects our spirituality because we didn't stay, just as much as our spirituality affects our prosperity. Yeah. It takes a lot of work. The opposite end of this, though, that I have a question for, that I think we have to ask, is what about the people who seem to be prospering but are clearly not spiritual? Like there is no spirituality in them. Now, I do want to say I've never seen somebody be significantly prosperous that wasn't also a giver? Not significant long term.
Right. You're saying that we're not generous
Yeah,
people.
even if they weren't
believers per se. Yeah.
Right. You know, they teach generosity.
So in essence, they were practicing some spiritual
Right.
applications, and I believe they do work even for non-believers. You've asked the question before, can an unbeliever tithe and expect the and I'm paraphrasing how you asked the question, still expect the blessings or the favor of God to some degree because it's a biblical principle? And I think the answer is yes. There's a lot of biblical principles, spiritual applications that people put into place that aren't even believers or followers of Christ. And by doing so, whether it's as simple as treating people the way you want to be treated, you reap what you sow. And so even an unbeliever can reap benefits from spiritual principles that are found in the Word of God. I'm convinced of it.
But what about people who are prospering that are clearly not spiritual? How do you explain that to the believer?
Well, Scripture tells us not to look at those people, and not to say, they're doing this, they have this, therefore I need to do that or live that way or live that lifestyle. That ultimately God judges in the end, and I would say, irregardless of how, quote, blessed they may be, in actuality, as it relates to resources, prosperity, those things, there's a reckoning day, and this is all just temporary at best. This is just a little speck of time. And so we have to put it in proper perspective, not envy those people, try to emulate them.
If you're looking at them through lenses other than envy, and you're being realistic, and you can actually see beyond the wealth, I feel like you'd pretty quickly decide you didn't want the life that they have. Because if they aren't spending their money the way that God would have them spend it, then you don't want that life. You don't want that life that they're living as a result of the money that they have.
Because it's easy to happen. David would even say, I see the people flourishing that don't love you. And like, it was driving him crazy, almost to the point of...
But like, what business is it of yours? Do you know,
Exactly.
like, why do you make it your business? Why do you sit around, envying what other people have?
It's part of our nature, though, our sinful nature, particularly, I think, when we perceive they are unrighteous people, to see them. They're like, wait a minute, I'm trying to do the right thing over here, and I'm struggling. I couldn't even get the box of ice cream. I had to stay with the basics. When these people over here have unlimited resources, it's not right, but it's our nature. And flip it around the other way, though, it's also our nature and tendency that if we are blessed and perceiving as believers, sometimes to lose sight and focus of that and to maybe even hoard those resources rather than blessing other people, blessing the kingdom of God with it. And so we can get caught struggling in either direction of that spectrum, even as believers, if we're not careful, if it's not put in right perspective.
Oh, yeah, because like we talked about earlier this week, the beginning of this book where God was saying, like, you have nice houses, you keep making them nicer, and, my temple's falling apart.
Yeah, when is it too much? I do think we become super... I don't know that I've always been this way, but I don't care how much money you got. I just don't care anymore.
I just don't think it says much about your character.
I just don't care. Like, I don't care, and I don't care how you use it personally. Like, I care how much I got, and I don't want to think too much about that, but I do care how much I got or how much I don't have. I want to make mine work, but if you got it, that's great. If you, if you don't and you need some help to figure it out, I will say, I want to say this correctly. My personal experience, this is my personal experience with me. I can't speak for nobody else but me. The condition of my heart has had a significant impact on the condition of my finances over my lifetime. That's just the truth of it. And I look back at it and wish I had been as concerned about the condition of my heart and allowed that to be a byproduct instead of working so hard at some other things that were useless and not working enough on the condition of my heart.
I will say to that on the flip side, so I do think that when your spiritual life is in order, it makes it simpler for you to, I don't want to say amass wealth, but you're just going to choose to spend your money differently. You're going to choose to save it. You're going to choose where you think it should go. You're going to recognize the importance of what it can get you, but you also are not going to let it rule your life. It's not going to be the thing that you're striving for. It's almost like you said, a byproduct. So I don't think that what you're preaching is, well, get your spiritual life in order and you're going to get rich. But I do think that, because I know from our experience, when we got married, we were so broke. Oh my gosh, we were so broke. And for years and years, our hearts were in the right place and we served and we struggled to get by for years. But I think that as a result of being content with whatever we had at the time and wanting, just to place our priorities in the right spot, that it made us able to do things like pay off our house a lot earlier because we weren't taking the extravagant vacations and driving really nice vehicles and buying expensive clothes. We were trying to put things in order. We were trying to keep our priorities where we thought God would have wanted them to be.
Yeah, and
I'm not saying we didn't make any mistakes, but you know what I'm saying.
Here's what I would say about spiritual condition where it has to do with money. If your heart is right, you will be free.
Yes.
You might not be wealthy,
right,
but you'll be free. And there are broke people that are bound by money, and there are rich people that are bound by money. But there are spiritually healthy people that are free from it.
Yeah.
And even you talked about how you spend money, that your heart's right, you'll spend money differently. I believe when your heart's right, where you invest money, you will put it in places that you would not have normally done, but God would have guided your steps, and the return on it will be significantly different or safer, when everybody else is.
And you'll find yourself wanting to do things like you want to be able to afford to help somebody when you see somebody that truly needs help. You want to have the money to do those things. I just think when your priorities become more aligned with what God asks of you, then it just...
all those things ultimately change, which end up blessing you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Even if that's not the purpose of why you're doing those things.
Thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. I hope you'll be back tomorrow as we continue a conversation around the book of Haggai.